Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today I'll be talking to Luther Russell. Now, I know you might not know who Luther Russell is, but some of your favorite musicians probably do. He's an LA singer-songwriter, guitarist, and producer, and he's played and worked and toured with a whole laundry list of great artists over the years. He's written songs for Weezer. He fronts the band Those Pretty Wrongs with big star drummer Jody Stephens. He's toured with Robyn Hitchcock. And of course, he's had his own long running solo career and released a ton of albums, including 2019's excellent Medium Cool. You should check that out for sure. Now, speaking of cool, that brings us to another one of Russell's credits and the reason I'm talking to him today. As a teenager, he was in a band with Jakob Dylan. They were called the Bootheels, and they also included guitarist Tobi Miller, who went on to form the Wallflowers with Dylan, and drummer Aaron Brooks, who went on to play drums for everyone from Moby to Lana Del Rey. Russell played bass and sang lead for the Bootheels. Now, they only lasted a few months and played a handful of shows. But during that time, they also wrote and recorded more than a dozen songs, which have just been released on the album 1988, The Original Demos. For a bunch of kids in a practice space recording on a cassette deck, they sound really impressive. Kind of like the Replacements, but with some of the cowpunk twang of maybe Rank and File. You can hear that especially in Jakob and Tobi's guitars. Now, a couple of days before the album came out, Russell zoomed in from his LA home and we chatted about the Bootheels, his other projects on the go, and a whole lot more. Check it out here and enjoy. Well, I guess let's start at the beginning. How did this band come together? I mean, because honestly, this sounds to me like one of those things where if you didn't have the cassette to prove it existed, people probably wouldn't believe you.
That's exactly how I feel about it. I just feel like it would have been. I don't think. I think we would have. We wouldn't have believed ourselves, if you know what I mean. Like if we didn't have this sort of totem of that time and the rehearsal tapes and stuff, I would just thought it would have just sort of been lost to the wind. It would have been just thought of as a kind of fuzzy little memory, honestly. So to hear it so starkly, the work that we did and how much fun we had, it's pretty enlightening, especially
Yeah.
over 30 years later. Pretty
Well,
crazy.
well, yeah. I mean, so how did you guys first get together? I mean, how do Luther Russell and Jakob Dylan and Tobi Miller and Aaron Brooks all end up in a room together?
Basically, so I was living in Northern California. I took a trip down to visit. I grew up in Los Angeles. I took a trip because I was about 17 and I'd been through a couple of dramatic things. I sort of got in a bad car accident, and then a close friend of mine died in a motorcycle wreck. And I just really just went down to visit some relatives and just try to get away for a minute. And I was staying with a cousin, and I went to get a guitar string at the Guitar Center on Sunset. This is probably in '87, and that's when I met Tobi Miller. And he just asked if I was the bass player. I said, yeah. There was two simple questions: that, and do you like the Replacements? And I was sort of taken aback. I said, I do. So we exchanged numbers, and then before I left town, we had decided to to meet up, to hang out. And so, we were excited to do that. Back then, sort of like it's kind of like you meet kindred spirits. You don't really do it online. You just happen to run into someone in person your age and likes the stuff you do. So we did that. We got together, and he asked if it was cool if he had to pick up a friend from the airport. And that turned out to be Jakob. So that was pretty wild. And then I went back home, but we had sort of hatched a plan for him to move me down to LA. So I informed my parents that I was leaving to move down to Los Angeles. There's not little they could do about it, I suppose. And Tobi came up and moved me down. And my mom had an old school friend. They had gone to Monterey Pop Festival together. Her name was Chris Brooks, and she was an old, like, she used to do press for Bill Graham back in the day and stuff. And so I was able to stay in her garage for like $100 a month off of Melrose, which wasn't too far from where Tobi lived. And we started playing together. And then she had twin children, a bit older than I was, Aaron and Willow, and a boy and girl. And Aaron came down visit. I remembered him from childhood, and he said he played drums. So I said, "Why don't you come jam with Tobi and I?" And next thing you know, we were playing. And then Jacob started coming around and liked what he heard and asked if he could join. And then there you have it. We had a rehearsal spot. We were playing. The chemistry that you hear was pretty close to the chemistry we had right away. So hope that's not too long-winded.
Not at all. But you weren't together for very long, right?
No, we were together. It seems as if we were together. I'd say February of '88 to maybe June if we're pushing it. Probably June. So
Wow.
just
I mean,
maybe,
because that is a tremendous amount of work that you did in a pretty short span of time, really.
The couple of us were supposed to be in school. We did we did a little too much work for our. I had taken the GED. I was out of school. Aaron was a bit older than us, so he was out of school. Jacob was supposed to be in school, and Tobi was in school. Yeah, we started woodshedding right away, and I had a lot of tunes, and it did gel right away. We set a rehearsal schedule. We were pretty serious, and we started throwing these parties and playing sets, on Friday and Saturday nights, and it started getting a little out of hand. Something was happening there for sure. And then we just enough to book a couple local gigs, but our fans weren't old enough to really go to the shows, and we weren't really anything like what was on the scene. So.
Right.
Yeah.
But still, so were these all your songs that you came in with, or was there a lot of co-writing?
Initially, but Jake had some great ideas, and so Jake and I co-wrote a few things on there. There's a couple tracks on there we co-wrote: Beeline for You, Interstate 68, The Deal. There's quite a few songs that he wrote, and because he and Tobi, I played bass, he and Tobi played guitars. They'd been playing together a while. They kind of had this interlocking sound that was really set and forget. It was really great. It was ready to go, and so it just wouldn't have quite sounded. I mean, yes, I had most of the tunes, but we just kind of went about it. We didn't think about too much who was doing what. We just went and played. I was just incredibly thrilled. I was thinking, I guess I was the singer. Tobi and I tried to convince Jake to sing at that point. He wasn't really ready. He just kind of wanted to hang back and feel it out. That was fine. And we used to beg him from time to time to sing. I did, so I didn't always have to sing. But as we know how that worked out, he ended up singing.
Yeah, he's doing okay for himself.
He's doing fine. Yeah.
He's managed to survive the
he's
breakup of Bootheels.
Exactly. Yeah.
But at that time, was having him in the band did it amount to an advantage or a disadvantage, or was there any sort of to it?
No, I mean, Tobi and him were really old friends. I was, I grew up in music, musical family, songwriters and stuff like that, and session musicians. Aaron Brooks, his mom was in rock and roll. She knew, I mean, when he was like 6, 7 years old, like Led Zeppelin was coming by the house and stuff. I mean, none of us were really fazed by anything. In fact, right. I didn't even know till very recently that Aaron's first drum lessons were by John Bonham himself, which is just crazy. When he was about 6 or 7, he came by and kind of did a little boot camp on him. So, I mean, I wasn't even aware of that. He never even talked about it, but it makes sense since his mother did publicity for the Stones and Led Zeppelin and The Who and worked for Bill Graham. So to make a long story short, we were all pretty versed in it. And Tobi was already, had known Jake since they were kids. So nothing really fazed us. We didn't even talk about it really. I think we even when I was digging up the rehearsal tapes, we covered like All Along the Watchtower or something, just to have something to jam on. So yeah, it wasn't really discussed too much.
No, but externally it didn't sort of bring you any sort of wanted or even unwanted attention? No,
not really, except one time we did play the Troubadour, and some, you have to imagine, I don't know how anyone even know about us. And then when we played the Troubadour, we went under a different name, because as we started to get out
because you weren't obscure enough.
Yeah, we weren't obscure enough. And as we got out there to play, I think Jacob at the time might have been a little concerned or something. Well, sure enough, I was standing out front of the Troubadour with Jake, and some guy walked up and said, "Hey," to me, said, "Hey, are you Bob Dylan's son?" And I said, I just kind of shouldered it. I said, "Yeah." And he asked me a bunch of questions, and Jake was kind of lurking, and I thought to myself, and then he went away, and I thought to myself, "Wow, how the hell does this guy even know?" So it goes to show you how large the legend loomed at that time,
Mhm.
especially in the late '80s. It was pretty huge. But yeah, it didn't seem to affect us. We
Yeah.
didn't have enough time for it to affect us. We were already
No.
broken up by the time anything would have gotten out of hand.
But I do have to say, if I walked up to you and Jakob Dylan in a room standing together, I don't think I'd have trouble
Yeah,
figuring out
you
which
wouldn't
one
make a
was Bob's
beeline
son.
for me, to quote
Yeah.
us.
So has this tape just been like sitting in a drawer unheard for 30 years, or is this
Pretty
something that,
much.
yeah,
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's I've had the tapes. I'm not in a very organized way either. I mean, a couple of these guys hadn't heard the tape since we did it. Aaron and Toby for sure. I think Jake had heard it once or twice. If we got together, I might have given them a copy. But yeah, and I dug up the masters, and it took me a while to just get all the tapes together. But sure enough, I had everything. So it wasn't as I was more of a pack rat, I guess, than I thought I was. But yeah, it just pretty much sat there gathering dust, and not even in some perfect condition or anything. But
So
there it was.
did you record it like onto a 4-track cassette or onto reel to
Yeah,
reel?
yeah, it was recorded onto a Porta One that I, had brought down with me, and I had a sort of basic idea of what to do, and we'd rehearsed so much. We were pretty well by the time we were ready to cut. I kind of had a bit of a plan of how to cut us, and so I think what I did was record the band live in our spot. We played live, and I just kind of put us onto 4 tracks, and then I mixed that down for anyone who's technical out there. I mixed that down to a nice 2-channel mix, put it back in the machine, and overdubbed my vocals and overdubbed a few lead guitar parts. So sadly, I couldn't get to the original, before the Redux. I couldn't get to those individual tracks, which would have been really nice. But it's a decent enough mix, and you're not thinking about much of these things when you're 17. I mean, I'm at the fact I even had the wherewithal to do it. I'm kind of pat myself on the back, because like you said, it could have been lost to the winds. You wouldn't have even barely had evidence that we existed without this tape. So
Well, yeah, exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned the replacements earlier, because as soon as I pushed play, I went, oh, okay, well, I kind of hear
yeah,
where this is coming from.
absolutely. That's the one band we could all agree on. And so, that includes Aaron, and Toby and Jake loved the replacements, and I did. And um it just was it was the jumping off point. Yeah,
So
for
how
sure.
do the songs hold up to you after all this time? Are they better than you kind of remember them, or are there moments of high school yearbook-ish stuff in there?
Yeah, I mean, there's some clumsy poetry in there, but I think it holds up okay. I mean, there's a couple of songs I really do dig a lot, especially Interstate 68 Blues means a lot. I still perform it sometimes. But yeah, I mean, cons- whenever I listen to it, I think, wow, not bad for 17. I mean, I do think that we had a full-fledged sound, a pretty fully developed sound. And I think the lyrics are just sort of humorous and self-deprecating enough. It doesn't appear that we took ourselves too seriously lyrically.
No, but
So,
it just has such an energy, I mean, it does have
oh,
that
cool.
17 years old and we're going to conquer the world, you
Absolutely.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of, it's definitely more punk rock than I remembered it being. I do think when I listen to it, I think if there's been a band that sounds like us, I think we're a bit prototypical.
Mhm.
It's like, it's kind of like a bit of a, power pop punk in Americana before those, they stamped a bunch of, labels on that stuff. So, but I definitely, if a band's come along that sounded like us, I haven't heard them yet. We
No.
just occupy a funny little spot musically, I think,
Yeah, I mean, it's
maybe.
got, as you mentioned, it's got a touch of twang, especially in the guitars. There's a bit of the Kinmans in there, I would say. It
Right.
kind of
Sure.
harkens back to
Sure.
that too.
Yeah.
So then what happened? You guys play a couple of gigs, and then it just kind of has no more momentum, or
Right.
yeah.
Well, I mean, there was some momentum. We apparently, I mean, I didn't know this. That's the thing about doing a project like this. And the reason the liner notes are kind of oral history style,
Mm,
because 33 years ago, I mean, not one of us can remember everything, but
yeah.
apparently one of us remembered that Electra might have been sniffing around. I don't know how or why, but we went into a studio with my uncle, and we thought, after we did these demos, we went in the studio. We had like with 4 songs. As it turns out, I'm pretty sure the studio we went into, which is long gone, was Gold Star.
Oh,
Believe it or not, it was kind of
wow.
run down. But
Mhm.
Jacob, I remember we walked in and there was a gold record of Born to Run on the wall, and Jacob said, "I think this is gold. I recognize this." So I think the keyboard player for Yes at the time like owned the studio or was renting it, but my uncle got us in there on some spec time, and we started playing, and it sounded incredible. Like that's the first time I think we realized that we were pretty good, because we heard it back and it was wow. But the problem was there was some technical problems, and we kept losing tracks, and we were running out of time because old tape machines, if something's not right with them, you can literally, like, tracks were getting erased. Like, we'd play it back and there'd be no guitars. It got really frustrating, and it was such a shame, and we just had to can it for the evening. And then that was pretty much the last time we played together, and Jacob went off to art school. And so that was that. I remember when he told us he was gonna, have to leave town, and because he was also wasn't sure if he wanted to pursue his art. He was a pretty good painter and wanted to do that. So that was a shame about that. I think that had that worked out in that studio, I think we could have possibly gotten maybe a deal or something off of that. But that's how it kind of petered out. And so Tobi and I decided to move along and start a new band, which we did, a band called the 45s. And when that busted up, Jacob came back in town, and they started a band called the Apples, which turned into the Wallflowers. And I'd already started the Freewheelers by that point.
Yeah, no kidding. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you guys did it all backwards. You're
Well,
supposed to
quick.
get rich and famous and then do the super group, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what it feels like. But we all have a fondness for the time. It was very spontaneous. It was really innocent. We excuse me, we had a really good time. And we weren't overly serious. I mean, it was, when I listened to the rehearsal tapes, I kind of had to go through them to find some things, and it sounded like we were having a lot of fun. It was pretty much
Mhm.
just getting high and drunk with our friends, and and screaming and playing music and having a good time, like you should do when you're 18.
Yeah.
That's
Have
pretty
you
much
all
all
been
there
in a
was to
room
it.
together ever since, even just to hang out?
No, no. In fact, Tobi and I finally reconnected. Jake and Tobi have been friends for a long time. They've reconnected recently. The 3 of us are planning on getting together, I think, to catch up. Aaron lives in Georgia. He lives in Atlanta. He does production work. He does a lot of session work, but production work for Janelle Monáe. And so, but his son lives here, who ironically is his age when he was in the Bootheels, maybe a little older. So maybe when he comes out here, I'll get to see Aaron after all these years. But no, we've all stayed in touch pretty much, or they at least, they've all definitely stayed in touch with me.
Well, that's kind of the best part of it, I would think. You made some
Yeah.
friends out of it.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Jake and I have probably seen the most of each other over the years. We're still friends, and we check in with each other, and go get a drink here and there. And we did a show together about 10 years ago in New York. So yeah, we stay in touch, and I'm always keeping up on what he's doing, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what made this the right time to finally put this out? Was it just you were rooting around the house during lockdown and had nothing else to do, or what?
That's probably part of it. I was um, communicating quite a bit with Cheryl from Omnivore. We're kind of friends through the big star world. And I was talking to her about something else. I had a couple of Bootheels tracks had gone on to this anthology of my music called Selective Memories. I don't know how the subject came up, but I said, there's a whole tape of that stuff. And she said, hey, send it over. And once I did, it was really fast. She just came back immediately, said, we all love it. We want to put it out. And I said, no kidding. Okay, let me check with first Jacob and check with the guys and see. It was a process of getting everyone on board, and everyone seemed fine with it. From that point, it wasn't too difficult because everyone was super cooperative. And I thought it'd be cool to for it to see the light of day and to jump back in and see what we got to work with. And it's a trip. It's a trip to see this in a package, frankly, because it's always been this kind of like, it's had a little mystique. It's been this kind
Yeah.
of, mystical tape that's just buried somewhere that we all know about and remember fondly. Yeah.
It must be nice though too that when you listen to it, it's not, oh Christ,
Well,
what were we thinking?
it
You
could be
know?
worse. It could be worse. Sometimes there's some cringy moments, but it's like that's what music is. I mean, I have recent albums where there's cringy moments. I mean,
Yeah.
in many ways, I'm actually in many ways I'm more proud of this than other things because I think, wow, that if we hadn't all done this, I don't even know what any of us would have done. I
Yeah, it
don't
was the
know
first
what.
steps for a
It
lot of
was
you.
encouraging. It was
Yeah.
really encouraging. We all felt it was really encouraging, and yeah, we didn't. We there's no bad blood. It wasn't together long enough for there to be any bad blood, and we were. It was a bit like family. Like I said, Tobi and Jakob were best friends since elementary school, and I knew Aaron since I was, probably 12 years old. So it was definitely a little more familial that way, for sure.
So talking about you mentioned the Big Star family. I saw that you and Jody have been doing some new stuff. Can you tell me some more about that?
Yes, there's a reissue coming out on a label called Curation. It should be out by the end of the year. There's a reissue of our first two records in a kind of brand new gatefold vinyl, and so we're making a new video right now to kind of promote that. And we've been recording a new record. We're about halfway through tracking a new record, a third record, our third, and we I'm going back to Memphis next month to try to wrap up that tracking. So yeah, look for new Pretty Wrongs record next year, and definitely the first two albums coming back out. Unfortunately, we had a West Coast tour coming up next month with the Jayhawks. Unfortunately, just due to unforeseen stuff, we have to cancel, but we'll hook back up with them hopefully next year. But we don't sweat it too hard. We're grateful for any opportunity we get to do anything really. But
For
that's
sure.
what the Pretty Wrongs are up to. We're definitely moving forward with a third record. So that's a miracle to me.
Is it kind of staying in your wheelhouse, or are you taking a left turn somewhere? Or
It is going to be. I'm first to announce it here. We're doing a techno dance record. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it's. I would say it's definitely in our wheelhouse. A little more development, and it feels like a little. I know we wrote the material during the COVID years, so maybe it's a little more interior, a little more. There's a slight more melancholia to it. It's not intended, but I can kind of feel it, and strong. Feel really really strong about it. So hopefully it turns out as well as the last one did. The last one took us by surprise, that for Zulu, because we just weren't really sure what we had, and it turned out to be a really good record that we felt pretty proud of and all that. It
yeah,
felt like an improvement from the first. So hopefully you just never know. Hopefully we just get out on the right foot and this feels like an advancement of some kind.
right. And what
Yeah.
about a new solo album? It's been a few years now since Medium Cool.
Oh, actually, I am now putting the finishing touches on a new solo record, which I'm hopefully just about done with, and I'm not sure how it's going to be released just yet, but it's a bit different than Medium Cool. It's a little more like I have an album called Repair that I'd say it's closest in spirit to. It's a little more. It's definitely kind of rocking, but it's more of a acoustic. Use mandolins and some cool people guesting on it. That I'm pretty excited about, but more rootsy touches to it and stuff like sort of mandolins and fiddles, but not in a way that it's not like it's suddenly a country record. It's just more like in like a Rod Stewart record where you might hear that stuff, but it's not because he went country. It's just got those textures. So I'm excited about that. Hopefully I can finish that soon and get that out. You never know.
Is there
No.
another album lurking somewhere that?
There's a few. I've got a couple that I'm producing and pretty excited about. But right now, pretty much mine and the new Pretty Wrongs. And you never know. You never know. But this isn't a time to make, as evidenced by the tour I described. It's not really a time to make plans per se,
Right.
because so you just kind of take it day by day. I mean, it's a trip to be halfway through the Pretty Wrongs record and pretty much be buttoning up my record. So just to have made a little progress, and then of course to have this totem coming out.
Yes.
It's pretty wild, you know.
I think next you have to start a band with with famous people's fathers instead of famous people's
no
children.
doubt.
It'll be you and Bieber's
Hey,
father, and
if Bob calls up and wants a guitar player, I'll drop everything to do that. You know, I don't think there's anything I enjoy more than Bob Dylan's later period. It just sort of, you know, his 21st century period to me is almost fascinates me more now than even the past.
Oh, he's on a hell of a run. I mean, that's
hell
something
of a
to
run.
look forward to as an artist, right? I mean, try and pull
Yeah.
that off 20 years, 30 years from now.
I don't think anyone I don't think anyone will. I don't think anyone will pull off a, let's just roughly call it a third act, though, you know, it's probably a 12th. But
Exactly.
you know, I mean, gosh, you know, of all those later period records, like I go back to the most, and I thought it would be Time Out of Mind, which I love, but lately it's been Love and Theft and Tempest. Tempest is just slaughtering me, so that gives me hope.
Stuff, you know, even
and Rough and Rowdy is great.
Yeah,
it's as strong as anything. It's always next level with him. So I'm a big fan, and I'm always interested. I liked Shadow Kingdom. I thought it was great. I was completely gobsmacked by a couple of those versions, which I actually thought were the best versions. You know, Forever Young was a good example, where the version he did in Shadow Kingdom I thought was the best version he'd ever even done. So Tombstone Blues was great, what he did there. So I'm always paying attention to what Bob's doing.
Yeah, you and me both.
Hard not to.
Did you have a Bob encounter back during the time of the Bootheels at all?
No, he was no, I sadly no, but Tobi certainly did. You know, he did, and I think Tobi was out there when he was doing Oh Mercy. But I was always keeping tabs through Jake. But no, I don't think I ever had a run in with him. You know, which is fine with me. You know.
Yeah, exactly. It'd probably be. I think he'd be the one guy you'd fanboyish around, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I just like listening to music. You know. I've met a few of my heroes, and it can go either way, you know. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not sure what can really be gained or lost by it, if it even matters, you know. Sometimes it's a bummer, sometimes it's cool, but it doesn't at the end of the day really have much bearing on the art.
No, exactly.
It's almost like a completely separate thing, really, you know, because
so.
And art really isn't the person. It's a funny thing. It's almost like another person. It's an extension of that person. It's like an avatar or something, you know. It's just as valid, but it's not the human. It's what comes out of their sort of their psyche and their imaginings and their creativity and their internal search, ideally.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the conundrum a lot of people are in right now, where, you know, you'll have an artist who is beloved, and then people find out, oh, kind of an asshole in real life. But, you know, that's the way it goes. To me, you know, obviously there are lines and limits and you know, scales of justice, but there's a whole lot of people, if you start critiquing or looking too closely under the microscope, you got to invalidate just, you know, vast swaths of the culture, which.
That's right, you do. And I think art is, the whole point of art is to be better than ourselves, to search beyond ourselves. And so in a way, that's, if someone's trying to do that through their art, they're giving it a shot. You know, it's at the end of the day, it's a shot in the dark, and people might see it or hear it or whatever. But it's certainly not to be conflated with the person.
Yeah, exactly.
The person is, you know, we're mortal. The art isn't mortal. The person is.
Right.
So you can kill the person, not the art.
Exactly. So what are the odds of a Bootheels reunion tour? 0?
You know, a couple of us wouldn't, you know, I don't know if a tour could happen. I mean, it'd be fun if there was a gig or something. That'd be a blast. I would think if that ever happened, it would be for the reason of like a benefit or something like that. But you know, I mean, these days you got to be pretty open-minded, but more often than not, people are just way too busy. Tobi is not doing music anymore. He's sadly, but in a cool way. I mean, for years he's been really involved in real estate and stuff, and really enjoys that. Aaron is involved in music, so like I said, production. Jake is obviously Jake and I do more of the same thing. He's on the road right now promoting his record, and I'm kind of buried in the studio doing archival stuff like this or new records like what stuff with Jody. So we all have our hands full for sure. But
Yeah.
I don't make a habit of saying no too much.
Well, if it happens,
Just,
send me a
yeah.
ticket. I'll show up.
I think it depends on the demand. So hopefully people, hopefully people really get exposed to this enough and dig it enough to really get interested and they'll, that will have warranted a reason to do something.
Yeah, well, I think it'll appeal to a pretty wide audience because it appeals to people who like you, people who like Dylan, people who like the Replacements, anybody
Yeah.
honestly who grew up in that era. It cuts a pretty
It's a
wide.
little missing piece of what I like about it is that, there's not a huge, people kind of think they have their head wrapped around, for instance, like the 80s or the late 80s and what was going on, but it's a kind of a nice little missing piece, a little, kind of an interesting vibe. There were a lot of things going on back then and weren't necessarily the most popular things, or whatever notable things, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's so wild. It's so long ago. It's hard to think, because we're older. It's hard to think about, like, wow, but hopefully it appeals to young people. That's what I hope is that someone who's the age we were hears it and just gets excited by it. That's what I'm hoping. I mean, maybe it's wishful thinking, but I think older people can enjoy it just because for people that have their head wrapped around that era and understand the context.
Yeah, for sure.
But for those who don't understand the context, it might be even cooler, hopefully. It kind of shows that, for instance, even that, with Jakob, that there's a bit of, he's got his own story and everyone has their own story. That's not necessarily what you think, that everyone, you kind of just don't arrive. You cut your teeth for a while and you woodshed and you try to get better at what you're doing. And he's endured just as many sort of like, missed opportunities or dead ends as anyone else and come out the better for it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today I'm talking to Chris D. Now, in the LA punk scene, Chris D is basically a living legend. He's a singer and songwriter and a poet, and he led not one but two legendary bands. First, there was the darkly powerful 1970s outfit Flesh Eaters, whose lineup included members of X, The Blasters, Los Lobos, and Tito and Tarantula. After that, he formed the rootsier 1980s band Divine Horsemen, which featured his then-wife Julie Christensen. On top of all that, he wrote for Slash Magazine. He produced iconic albums for the Gun Club, the Germs, the Dream Syndicate, and others. He ran his own Upsetter Records label, and a whole lot more. Bottom line, when it comes to that world, Chris D has been there and done that. Lately, though, he's doing it again. Several years ago, he revived the Flesh Eaters for some shows, and that reunion eventually led to their stellar 2019 comeback album, I Used to Be Pretty. Around the same time, he and Christensen, who have remained friends obviously over the years, resurrected the Divine Horsemen, and they just released the outstanding album Hot Rise of an Ice Cream Phoenix a few weeks ago. Recently, Chris D, his last name is really Desjardins, generously gave me more than an hour of his time to discuss the past, present, and his future plans for both of his bands, along with his writing, other parts of his life, and just a whole lot more. His favorite new bands, all kinds of stuff. So sit down, settle in, and spend an hour enjoying an in-depth conversation with one of Los Angeles punk's founding fathers.